gets funky. Thoughts deep, boys steeped in the depths that he sunk. Big stress, depressed in the middle of fall. Sky gray, high late in the thick of it all. I wonder, how long can a human survive just staying alive or carrying the rest of the tribe? Waiting for the day to arrive or struggling dies, and I be doing way, way more than getting by. So why? Cop myself a cup of coffee, sip of water in it softly, cleansing me of stress I hold. Hey, cop myself a cup of coffee, sip of water in it softly, cleansing me of stress I hold. Realize life is so much more than just living a day. Every day I can sit and reflect and reconnect to myself and know that I've been given. See, giving up is not an option. So when I'm looking at gray skies, I'll be adopting a new way to deal with a test. Lord, relieve me of stress and bring me looking like we're blessings dropping. And so I got myself a cup of coffee, sip of water in it softly, cleansing me of stress I hold. Coffee, sip of water in it softly, cleansing me of stress I hold. Hey, here we go. Yeah, let's do this. Y'all ready? 1, 2, 3. In times of test, let no harm beset me, oh my Lord, oh my Lord.
I just can't find anything in here with Bernie Sanders. I mean, Hegel, Marx, Das Kapital. I don't know what Joe Manchin's thinking. If it's the 1950s, I'd be in trouble. This would be sedition. Good evening, everybody. This is Divided We Stand. It's Saturday night, 9:15 Eastern Daylight Time. I guess we're going to be changing soon. And it's a rainy, misty night in Bridgeton, New Jersey. And wowzers, all my stuff is off here. Ooh. Hey, it's free, so don't complain, right? Any case, welcome to Divided We Stand. If you haven't subscribed to our channel on YouTube, please do so. It's a good idea. You'll get notifications and you'll know when the next video is up, or at least when we're going live. And if you haven't become a member of Divided We Stand on the group Divided We Stand on Facebook, please do so also. We're growing, and remember that you cannot get into our group unless you agreed to the rules. Dave mentioned that last week. I'm glad he did. And, you know, we're sticking to that. We get probably maybe roughly 15 to 20 people who ask every week to join the group. And when you ask them to abide by the rules, they put no response. Well, they're not getting in, and you're not getting in because we've got rules and we've got to stick with them, and we're really happy about that. That's out of the way, and now the show's about to begin. And we've got a big star here tonight. In fact, he's here every night, and it's not me. At least that's what he says. I can prove it. I know he has at least 3 or 4 subscribers on his channel. Put that together, we'll have about 80 some subscribers. If you're watching this, you're one of the chosen few. But you won't be disappointed, because who knows what Dave Price will say or do. We never know. Dave, how are you doing? It's great to see you.
Well, Brian, could I have the echo off? Thank you.
Absolutely.
Now,
Absolutely.
Brian, I want to congratulate you. For you, this is early. You actually spoke your first words at 9:14 tonight. Obviously, promptness is not one of your strong suits. So would you like to tell the
As
people...
Paul would say, I'm on Jamaican time.
Yeah, you make up the time. You're right. But the idea is, for people who don't know, there's 2 problems with this. The technology is really tricky. We do different roles at different times. Brian is, not only is he the host, and he does all the technical things on this show.
And not very well either, but I do.
Well, none of us do. It sounds like an excuse, but it's not. The idea is that anyone who's tried this knows that it's not that easy. Yes, we'll be with. I want that Fahrenheit 451. Remember that. I want to talk about that. That's one of my favorite
put that down
subjects.
As a favorite comment, and that way it'll come back.
Planet of the Apes, humans. Yes, because that's one of the things as we look at this thing called the United States of America, misnomer. My estimation, misnomer. All the times we've been divided states that sometimes can figure out what to do and sometimes can't. And I assume you're playing that music in the background because it sounded like a cat. You don't have a cat.
No.
Right? Music.
See, here's where you have it wrong, Dave. This is where Dave doesn't understand. The music is the show. Dave is the background. Okay?
Right. Ladies and gentlemen, I wasn't going to tell you this.
I've opened up a can of worms already.
No, you haven't. Brian, you know that I will always be grateful for you, putting me on this show. But Brian, there's somebody coming to Washington, D.C. on December 3rd, 4th, and 5th. And if things work out right, I will not be appearing on the show anymore unless she will let me. Do you want to guess who that is coming to Washington, D.C.?
She will let you.
Yes.
I got to think for a little bit.
Who do you think that might be?
I think I've got it, and I'm just trying to
Who
remember.
do you think that might be?
She will let me. Well, you know what? Normally people would say it's Judy, your wife.
No, I love Judy. We've been married 48 years, and I listen to her, but that's not her. Not this time. It's somebody else.
It's somebody else.
Who has visited D.C. On 3 occasions prior to this.
Got it.
That I know of.
I've got it.
Who is it?
Caitlyn Jenner.
Well, no, not Caitlyn. No,
I would say Toadie Fields, but she's dead.
Yes, that's true. That's basically everyone you admire is dead. Hey man, Lenny Bruce is really good tonight, isn't he?
Everybody I like is dead. I mean, I've got an army of great people, but they're all dead.
So does the Zombie King, but that's beside the point. Brian, you're not doing very well with the guessing tonight.
No, but they sound better.
It's easy, Brian. It's easy, Brian. Who would I listen to over Judy? There's only one person in the world.
Yeah, I just don't want to say that name. I just don't want to say
Go
that
ahead.
name.
I want to hear you. Say that name. Never mind. Ladies and gentlemen, this is called Dave Works Well with a Handicapped Saturday Night Show. Okay? Brian, since you have no idea what you're doing, let's see what you know about what's going on in America. So you're our resident chief of concern. Although I'm fast, I'm fast approaching you and coming up. Boy, this sounds weird on your rear. I don't mean that the way it sounds, but there's not much. First of all, I think anybody who's not concerned in America today, there's something really wrong with them. And that's I mean everybody who except Toady Fields and Lenny Bruce who are indeed dead, they're probably not worried.
I'll tell you, Toady Fields was. I remember Mike Douglas was interviewing. It was the guy with the long tongue from Kiss.
Gene Simmons.
Gene Simmons. So she said to Gene Simmons, she says, "You're not going to fool me." He says, "Well, I'm looking at your nose. You're Jewish." And he actually was born in Israel.
No,
his real name was like Chaim Weitz or something. And she destroyed him. I mean, it was he had nothing to say.
Part of my role is trying to take all these not desperate, although sometimes for you they're desperate comments, disparate comments, and time together. Gene Simmons is also the subject of one of the great fake news stories in all of rock.
You'll have to entertain us with that because I don't know.
I will. Well, and fake news, of course, how do you tie that in? Well, fake news tied into Trump, right? So what happens is Gene Simmons does have an amazingly long tongue, which when he goes, anybody who's seen him, it's like 7 feet long.
Can you do that again? I didn't quite catch that.
Nah, I saved that for people that can really take use for it, and you're not one of them.
Now you're turning on everybody in our audience here.
Yeah, right.
It's turning into an R-rated show.
So Gene does that in concert, and when the fires exploded, kids. Well, somehow the story got started, probably this way, as fake news often does. Man, that's a long tongue. Nobody could have a tongue that long. Yeah, and somebody said, I know what he did. What? He cut off a cow's tongue and had it attached to his tongue, and that is one of the great.
Well, he's as big as a cow, but I don't know.
Yeah. So I guess my point there is, while Trump may be the king of fake news, because everything he says is not the truth, it's not the only fake news, and it's going all over the place. Veg and the gang had a hit. Veg had a hit. Okay. So Brian, back to you. Concerned warrior that you are, chief warrior. Obviously good concerns every week. I think shared by many of our viewers. What's got you on edge as we enter the haunting season of Halloween?
Okay, here's what's got me on edge. Okay, now this is not a typical news story, and I've seen all of them from the week. But Dave, I've been thinking about with Trump and the fact that he has a deposition coming up on Monday. Whether he'll show up for that or not, I don't know. I doubt it. We know Steve Bannon has been subpoenaed.
And I want to talk a little bit about that tonight.
It looks like a lot of these people aren't going to show up. And I'm thinking about, Trump's plan. For example, we know, I was just talking to somebody from Russia today, and they assume that Donald Trump was rich, and like, for example, you have to admit he's a good businessman. And I say, well, I don't admit that because he's $2 billion in debt. He's a horrible businessman, right? But what he has effectively done, it's the Roy Cohn thing. He has learned how to use the legal system to play the system, to just drag things out time-wise. And what I'm feeling is this. I'm feeling that the Republicans, that their main strategy is, as I'm going to show you some videos, is to attack the other side, speak generalities, but just bleed out the clock. And it seems to be such an effective thing because that's all they do. And they play this legal system. I have no faith that the Democratic Party is going to be able to do anything because it just goes on, and it's like waiting in we all have that experience of waiting in the doctor's office. If you have a 10 o'clock appointment, it's 10:45, and you're saying, God damn it, my time's just as important as the doctor, but you kind of just hold out a little bit more and blah, 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 blah. And then, maybe once in our lives we have the balls to just say, you know what, I'm just taking off. I'm not waiting here in the office anymore for this shit. My father did that one time. But I feel, Dave, that this is the problem, and I have a tough time philosophically dealing with my existence in this country because I realize that they're playing the clock here, and they're playing it effectively, and we're all suffering. You, me, and
true.
Our viewers.
Now, Brian. Many times, I think one of my roles is to somewhat reassure you that maybe things aren't quite as bad as they are. But in the case of, and I want to talk at length in a few minutes about it, in the case of this legal things going on, I think I'll make you feel worse by the end of the show.
All right.
Because I think it's worse than even we know. Poking around a little bit this week. But I do want to say one thing in defense of myself. No, I said, I always tell, I'm as wrong as I am right. One of the great things when I was a political writer, it is amazing. You really weren't held to any truth in terms of, tomorrow, like sort of like weathermen, they do the best predictions, but they can be judged if it rains or not. But we could even hide behind, well, it looked like that on Monday, but Tuesday, this emerged and that kind of thing. But I had a fairly good track record of trying to be accurate, predicting, because that's part of the fun of being a political writer. And if you remember on the show, I said that Donald Trump, flat out, would declare for president in September. Do you remember that?
Yes.
This week, somewhat vindicated, although looking at that, he was prepared. Internal things, he was prepared, and he was talked out of it. So while I was right, I can take no credit for it because he didn't do it in September. But I think that points to two things. One is that we don't know what's going to happen in politics. We just never know. If you had told me, and I consider myself relatively an aware person, interested in politics, like I said, since 1968, I think I would date it from then, have written about it, studied it, live in the city of it. And if you had told me in 2015 that we'd be sitting here doing what we're doing tonight, and the idea of that anything that's happened, between that time and now, I would have just looked at you and said, I don't see it. I mean, how can that happen? So if that period of Trump, remember he literally came down the golden escalator. He gilds everything with gold. From that moment to now, people have said it almost seems like a dream, or a nightmare, more the case. So, but it was kind of nice just for self-satisfaction to know that while I was wrong, and I admit being wrong, I have no problem with that, I was reading the tea leaves well until the tea leaves were moved. So why were the tea leaves moved? Interesting enough, there was heated meetings in, the wonderful castle of Mar-a-Lago, or whatever the hell Trump calls it now. And I guess for once, or one of the rare times, he was convinced not to do something he wanted to do. He was ready. He wanted to go full tilt boogie. Let's do this thing. And some people, and again, it'll eventually come out who, said, no, Mr. President, because he wants everyone to call him, obviously in his inner circle, Mr. President, which is not unusual. If I were to meet Barack Obama on the streets or anywhere, hello, Mr. President, they keep that title. But in Trump's case, he really still thinks he is Mr. President. So there's a big difference. However, what they said was, you do not want to do that because if something happens in the midterms, you do not want to be blamed. And their fear was his emergence as a candidate would energize Democrats, independents, liberals, Trump haters, and a growing number, not enough to really make a difference, but a relatively growing number of former Republicans to be more active. And so I don't know I know what the final decision was. He didn't declare. Now, he's actually, he's holding campaign rallies, Brian. They're not anything other than campaign rallies, filled with lies, filled with, he doesn't even do innuendos. He just makes up shit as he goes along.
And he's making money too. It's like a carnival show. And
one of the side things, a report came out, and look, I said early on in the show, it's a big word. I didn't know much about it until Trump, the emoluments clause, which basically says, presidents can't accept gifts because it could be considered bribes.
You were talking about that as we go back to 15 or 16.
I said no. Well, the reason I knew that, I'm not clairvoyant about it, but
Well, it seemed obvious that he would be,
there was but there were some people down here.
having
And I know
problems
this.
with this.
I know this again for a fact. The moment he put it, because I talked to the group that did this. There's a group down here, Attorneys for Ethics or something, and they knew this was going to be a rough ride. So as soon as he put his hand on the Bible, for the swearing in, they filed the charge in Superior Court on the emoluments clause. Now everybody kind of looks at that. That's no big deal. Well, it has another name, Brian. It's called a bribe. Now, a bribe is a bribe is a bribe. Having said that, you don't want the president taking bribes. You don't want the president of the United States appearing to take bribes, and you don't want bribes taken. Now, we know that there were countries who Trump was making deals with who bought entire floors of Trump International here in Washington, D.C., to put people at, I'm going to try to put this in a perspective that I can understand. You know how, it's obvious, but you know how hotels change their prices, right? With seasons. Right. So normally, there's certain seasons, depending on where you're located, that are big or off. One of the biggest ones here is Christmas. Simply because families come and they visit, and
higher
that
demand
kind of thing.
Also, so that's
more than in the summer. It's families. So I'm talking about rich people, coming in. So you could say the December rates probably the house. He would charge those year round. So I think the highest room charge at Trump Hotel is $3,400 for a room for a night, and they were getting it for a week. Well, who's getting that money? Donald Trump, right? There's nobody in the rooms. But there's no way really to trace that, right?
Well, the same thing with Trump Tower with the Russian mob. And
right.
The Russian mob buying properties for twice their value. It doesn't even have to be a bribe. Whatever he does is poison.
Well, because
even if he knows it's illegal, and even if he's they might even indict him. But how long is this? Again, it relates to what I'm saying.
We'll get to that in a moment. But you mentioned a very important name that I think, if people listening tonight or watching and listening tonight don't know about him, you have to. I think he's one of the most dangerous men ever to be born and act in my lifetime. He wasn't born in my lifetime. He predated me a few years, and that's Roy Cohn. Roy Cohn,
horrible man,
just bears repeating, was the brains behind Joe McCarthy, McCarthyism, the homosexual witch hunt known as the Lavender Scare, the Red Menace, responsible for more than 14,000 federal employees losing their jobs for one reason or another. You mentioned earlier when you were reading, that was Karl Marx's book, not Groucho Marx.
This was actually Paul Lafargue's book about meeting.
About that, okay.
Karl. Somebody gave me this a long time ago.
Well, I just, the name.
This book must be 100 years old.
But what you said was so true. You would have been done in 1950s Absolutely. With that, because we had such a fear
or even going back to 1918 with J. Mitchell Palmer. There are times I would have been. You would have been done too. Don't just say me. You would have been done too.
Oh no, I would have been done in a minute. But tonight you did it, just that simple act of having the book. So, and I'm glad you mentioned Mr. Palmer. That's another forgotten name. If you really want a trio of people who greatly influenced America poorly, all of whom were supposed to have something to do with law and order, it would be Roy Cohn, Mr. Palmer, and J. Edgar Hoover. They were just hard individuals. And we know that Mr. Cohn was a homosexual. Now, that has nothing bad to do.
No. But the hypocrisy, the projection.
What he did was attack homosexuals when he was one himself.
Dave, I'm gonna cut in there and ask you something here. Your feelings upon this. You and I, even though we're 9 years apart, we generally have been brought up in the same type of educational system in elementary school. We learned that the Reds were bad and this and that. And maybe we heard about Stalin, but we knew that they were bad. And I know, they had Lavrenti Beria, who was just a horrible, it was their J. Mitchell Palmer and J. Edgar Hoover. And all those years we learned how bad the other side was. And it was probably more or less true, certainly with Stalin. But now, as we've gotten older, then we look historically, like that book that you gave me to read about, the true things that went on in America for the last 200 years, we look back and we say, shit, we were almost as bad, you know?
No, Brian, you could take the almost out. I think the one difference there is now that, and maybe you should leave it in for this. We did everything short of the massive open killings that were done in Russia.
Right.
Everything else we followed.
We almost gulagged people, but
Well, we have gulag.
we have put them in jail, you know,
Well, no.
for
What do you call
weed
the
and
Japanese
stuff like that.
internment in World War II? What do you call the communists? You know, the scene. Of
Right.
where
I'm
you
just saying
live.
that the gulags were work camps and they're
Yes,
repressive.
no.
But however, if you were African American and you were put in prison for something stupid, you weren't having a good time. I mean, the difference. I don't know.
Well, that's the point. And I think the difference to me is this. One is the hypocrisy of the textbooks and many of the teachers. And I don't know how hypocritical the teachers are. They don't know any better of teaching American history that way. You know, we're always the good guys. We're always the good guys. We've never been completely the good guys. Sometimes we've been the most bad guys around, depending on who you were talking about. And Anthony, I'm going to come back to that. Don't let me forget. And that earlier comment on fair.
I have a way to favorite these, Dave. So that
Yeah, and I was because I think
always
that's,
come back
we see
on
that going tonight, and that's one of I don't have very limited,
not that the other comments are bad. It's just when Dave says.
No. What I'm saying is that's one of the areas. There's very few that I'm somewhat feel expert on, and that is one. I've taught it, I've studied it, I've spoken about it, banned books. That's one of my passions. Nothing written should be banned. That's just the end of my. But we'll get to that in a moment. So looking at these characters, if you will, they're bad in their time. They do a lot of damage, but because we tend to gloss things over, right? You know, and whitewash, literally, literally and figuratively whitewash history, we don't get that. There's a gentleman out there who just died this year, a couple months ago, actually. And if you haven't read him, when I say you, I mean anybody, right? I recommend, of course, the great historian where you start is Howard Zinn. Okay, I mean, that's where you really start if you want the truth. But James Loewen, who actually lived in D.C., and he wrote a series of books. Probably the most famous was "Lies My Teacher Taught Me," and he went into history, and he was just there's just some people that look brilliant, talk brilliant, and are brilliant. And I was so fortunate to become a friend, simply because we hung out we both went to these different think tanks, usually on the right, to see what the right was doing, and James would speak out, and I would speak out, et cetera, et cetera. And if you read that, and then think back, Brian, as you pointed out so much earlier, if you think about the history you were taught, again, I'm going to do a shout out to a person you know. I don't think anybody else from Bridgeton is listening tonight, but a person who changed my life was a history teacher, George McLaughlin. You know him from Bridgeton. And basically,
there's a fight in progress. Fight in progress.
Well, that was the old George, but I mean, he was interesting. I mean, he was a radical, and what he did, he just taught those of us who got the lesson, and some of us did, including Gary Peacock, who listens from time to time on the show. If Gary's listening tonight, that things are not as they seem, right? That look further, look at the record. Don't look today. It would be don't listen to the soundbite, right? Or don't do this or don't do that. Now, my concern today is, and this ties into Fahrenheit 451. It ties into exactly to that and other things. Is we're now banning in real time, right? And we're not just banning books. We're banning history. Have you been following the Texas?
Yeah, a little bit, at least, right?
Yeah.
My cousin was trying to text me, my Trumper cousin, trying to make it as though this was a Democratic thing, And
No.
Fella, you got it wrong.
No. And
to the bone.
I'll answer any questions tonight. I'm preparing something on that. And it doesn't matter. I actually, I think if my guesses are right, there are no good guys in this picture, including the press. I think the press got it wrong, but it's still bad. It's one of those things like, it doesn't matter what you find. It's still bad. And basically, in essence, in a nutshell, for anybody out there who doesn't know, is in a workshop, Brian, and you've been in hundreds of workshops, right?
Yes.
And most people in jobs, and I'm not going to debate with anyone, but I think educational workshops are the worst. But if you talk to somebody in any business, they're never good, right? Texas has basically passed a law saying that you cannot, if you're really distracted, you can't say anything bad about America in your classroom. Have anything bad. And if you do, you better have, quote, the other side. But that's only if you're trying to teach the history of black, you better have the white side. But if you're teaching the white side, that is the right side, they're saying, so you don't need any counter. And this person said in a workshop, made the national news, was talking about if you have textbooks or books, you didn't say textbooks, if you have books in your room on the Holocaust, you better have books on the other side. Now, wow, just stop. That comment, there was another side? Really? Seriously? So that's going to be a developing story to watch. Now let's get to those banned books. You mind, Brian? If we jump right in with our questions. Could you pull up two up so I can read them again? I'd at least two.
Okay, let's go to favorites again.
Yeah.
Well,
so I can address.
I just I don't know what the hell happened here. I guess I had Anthony's and I screwed up. He said he wanted to have a library of all the banned books.
But there were two others before. The first one was yes. There it is. My favorite, possibly vampire, with the greatest name ever. Not Lugosi, but Lugrisi. And maybe he goes by Bela to really be undercover. But it's my favorite, at least my favorite vampire name. Banned book. Care to comment? Yes. It's interesting. It's a banned book about books that are banned, right? Brian, a lot of people don't know the idea of where the title came from. Brian, remember, you play the role sometimes to you play the role of every man, or every person, I shouldn't say man, every person. Do you know where the title came from?
Well, I know it's the temperature at which paper burns.
And there you are. That's all it is. And of course, in that upside down world, firemen, their job is to burn books. Anthony, yeah, we'll talk about that. That's one of my favorite topics too. The failed book of
Dave,
Revelations.
don't we have a problem with most any book written as you go past 100 or 200 years, unless you're in it like for Shakespeare and for the the human drama. When it gets into saying what actually is occurring historically and how things are being created and about gods and things like that, when you get further back, it almost becomes a useless endeavor unless you yourself have some, rationalization for it. Right. I don't know that it's really helpful.
No, I don't. Let's Revelations. Right now we have, I don't know what the numbers are, Brian. I'm going to guess and go with 40% of Christian people are about as unchristian as you can be. Now, I mean, professed Christians. Well, part of that is because, they take the word they don't take the word of God in the Bible literally. They take whatever they want. They cherry pick. They do all kinds of things. But in my lifetime,
semantic fiat, which is even worse.
Yeah. Yes, Mandy, you're absolutely right. Well, I'll come back to that. I'm going to say with Revelations. So, what happens in the time of Shakespeare, right? This brilliant language. It was cool. Verily, I say unto thou. That thing we carried through. The King of England was King James. Now, if you study the kings, one of the things they were trying to prove at that time was a direct link to divine right, because they were two things. They were the leader of the England by being king, but they were also the leader of the church, the Anglican Church. Mm-hmm. And so they wanted to tie the two together. And King James brought together, some question whether Shakespeare was involved or not, because he's such a nebulous, they didn't have really good records. Maybe he was, but it doesn't matter. He called together a group and said, rewrite the Bible, put it into the language of us, and secretly, or not so secretly, nothing exists, but it's been verified, and make sure that people understand being reverent to the King of England is being reverent to God. Now, the moment they took on that task and did that, does that mean God was working at that moment? And we're going to assume for a moment, which I don't, that God is a person, but we'll just do it for a moment, that God was working through them to change his words to make it okay for King James to do whatever he wanted in church and in the country? I don't think so. And it's one thing if that book had disappeared, but the King James Bible is still considered to be probably the definitive gospel up until the 60s when you got the New Word Gospel. Yeah, and it was downgraded so people could understand it. So, so everything in there, we don't know. The other thing is if you talk to, and I recommend people do this, talk to some scholars who actually can read Hebrew, the ancient Hebrew. Most everyone will tell you, no, they didn't translate the words right.
Right. Difficult.
A Revelation being one of them.
That's where you see you get into semantic fiat, because then they start just saying, well, this means this. And it was this before, but now it means this, So now, that's a problem. And that's what Trump does with laws, or,
Yeah, well, and it's funny, what stays with you when you leave? I was there where you live, in the neighborhood where you live for, almost 25 years in the neighborhood, but there for 59 years in that area, in that township. Mm-hmm. And when you come out and you go left, and you're going to go toward Owens, but on the road where the Terry's Custard is, right? You know what I mean, right there. And right across, if you have to stop that stoplight, there's a church over there. It's a I forget whether it's Seventh-day Baptist or Seventh-day Adventist.
It's messed up because you see some of the quotes there, and you say, "Oh,
yeah." Well, I just remember one. I can't tell you, but I just remember
bizarre.
They were having a month-long seminars, a seminar on the meaning of the Book of Revelations. I said, "Good luck with that," because that again, biblical scholars who aren't looking for it to be the Word of God said basically that book was a hidden message to people about the evil that was Rome, right? And remember, Christianity started out, as an anti-Roman.
But again, Dave, just thinking about 2,000 years, and I know you agree with me, but 2,000 years ago, I mean, I've said this before, you don't need a 2,000-year-old book to know you don't kick an 80-year-old woman in the ass. But anything from that time period, it's so absurd. These are the days of ether, or even before that. Everything is so profoundly wrong that at some point, you say, well, why don't they give it up? I mean, it becomes such a destructive instrument.
Because if you want to blame someone, blame Saul, who saw the light on the road to Damascus, Paul. Now, that is historically correct, okay? Mm-hmm. And basically, I think the light he saw was this. It was the light of how to make more money and make Paul more important. Maybe he was the Donald Trump of his time. But Paul said, wait a minute, we're fighting these Romans. Why the hell are we going to do that? Rome has the world, right? At that point, it really had the known world. He said, let's make good buds with them. Maybe they won't eat so many of us with lions, and then we can go in. And I think Paul, or Saul, who became Paul, he's probably, if you had any self-awareness after death, you don't, but if you did, he might be smiling because of his work. Not only did Rome come in, the head of the Catholic Church located, right? Vatican City inside Rome. And, you have to remember historically that was the only church, right? For hundreds and hundreds of years. So Martin Luther comes along, puts up his 95
then
theses.
Then the Eastern Orthodox Church splits
apart. And they start to split. And in America. So what does all this have to do with what's going on in America today? Well, one of the problems that we have is religion. We have there, it's basically, the Jewish faith talks about Orthodox and, New Free. But it's kind of the same thing here. I mean, if you want to be a Christian, I choose not to be by choice. But if you want to be, I have a very nice suggestion for you. I say it all the time. Just read the red words in the King James Bible. They're the ones that Christ said, follow that, and you'll be okay.
Maybe the problem really isn't religion itself. It's more of a psychological problem. And and one that's kind of passed down. It was
of course,
Robert Zapolsky who said that. I'm going to repeat myself because I said this years ago, but he mentioned how there are certain types of mild forms of schizophrenia that he believes are occurring today. And he mentioned certain people, for example, there are some people, if they get a mild form of malaria, of lupus, that affects African Americans, it protects them from malaria. Certain people, Jewish people who had Tay-Sachs, if you had a mild form of Tay-Sachs, it would prevent you from getting the plague, which caused problems for Jews during the plagues in Europe, the Black Death, because they said, this must be the devil, they're being protected.
Right.
But so what he was saying was that, there can be this mild form of schizophrenia. It's called schizotypalism, and basically he believes that this is something that is real. It's a mild form of schizophrenia, and if you play this just right, this disease, you'll have a holiday named after you in December every year, and that's probably the only, because we keep saying, well, religion is the problem. But at some point we've got to turn it around and say, okay, there's got to be something psychologically wrong.
It could, Brian, or it could be. That's certainly an open interpretation. My interpretation of where it falls apart is humans are flawed, right? And power is a corrupting influence. Usually, people who want power seize it, refuse to give it up. That's governments, that's churches, and people. To me, we have a desperate need to belong. That's part of the human.
Well, isn't that's part of Maslow's needs with this?
That's
one
of the needs
social needs. We're social beings,
we and so
generally
we get very much influenced by the groups, right? We want to join, and that starts very early. The first is you're influenced by your parents, and usually, Brian, if you look at it, you either go.
Basically,
with
what you're
them.
saying is that we learn that mom and dad are always right.
Well, that's part of it.
Until you find out they aren't, and we're
there
not.
you are, but most
Dad really shouldn't have hit the dog with the newspaper. Doesn't really help. We don't rub the dog's nose in its urine. I mean,
right, but all that. So that's the first place. Then the second place, of course, is American education. You go to school. And
Amanda, you're right about that. I take that back. I think it was sickle cell. Lupus, it might have been something else. She's absolutely right.
No, Mandy is
a mild form of sickle cell. I'm sorry. I get things right about 70% of the time.
And that's what I like about Mandy. She corrects us. And I mean, seriously, because, it really is good. I mean, I don't want to say something wrong, but because I say a lot sometimes I forget, but sometimes I'm just wrong.
No, it was sickle cell. I forgot that.
No,
I couldn't remember at the time. And there's another one, too. I forget which one it is, but the problem is this mild form of something. And I think there's some type of research in this that
So you've got
seems more probable.
So back to what we're talking about. You got your parents, and you either go for it or reject it, right? So that's one way where religion creeps in. The second way, or a second way, is through schooling, and that's where socialization comes in. And pretty much you decide to be with the group or not be with the group, and you try to hopefully you pick and choose what groups you want to be with. But you have to make a decision: who's the in group, who's the out group. Do I want to be part of that? Do I want to be alone? I think it's really hard when you're the lone voice to stand up to something. It's a lot easier if you have some other voices to do that with you, but you're there. And then, kind of the third way, if you get out of schooling, is if you go in the Army or if you go into business, you fall in these categories. And so it's really hard. It's really, so one of the great in literature and life is the individual versus society. And right now, with the pandemic, is one of the greatest tests that can be delivered. What is the individual's rights versus the rights of the society in which he or she chooses to live and receive the benefits from, right? And, we look at this, and some people are turning to their religion. Some people are turning to Trump. Trump is a form. Trumpism is a form of religion. If you look at it, it's people say, oh, he's the devil. Well, I don't believe in the devil as a concept. I believe in evil as a concept. Because I think if you believe in the devil, it kind of cheapens what you do, right? I mean, the devil made me do it. Old Flip Wilson line, devil made me do it. Well, no, you did it.
But again, I think, again, and maybe we could add in, because we have discussed this topic of confirmation bias. It seems that also is a great problem in this country. Well, in the world, but let's just take our country because of this problem. Because you have people like my cousin, and we all have Trumper relatives or friends, I'm sure. And, you have a discussion which turns into an argument. And no matter what you say, I mean, it's like saying, okay, global warming is real. Climate change is real. And then you talk about carbon dioxide, methane, all that kind of stuff. But there'll be some guy that'll say, yeah, but how about we had 14 records where we went below the cold temperature, whatever. And then, Bill says it, and then because I said this is not necessarily a religious problem. It's more of a psychological problem that and you can't put everybody under the microscope. You can't give everybody therapy in this country. I don't know how. Well, there has to be some anti-propaganda that works.
Well, I don't know that there is. I mean, look at. Do
we have our Rasputin out there who can, not just cure the Tsarevich, but can just cure the Trumpers out there?
Well, and then we get, the argument, if you want to do that, was Rasputin a good guy?
No, he was not a good guy. He was not a good guy.
No, right. But also remember, he was, was he truly displayed and depicted as he was? Because that's
he was murdered. You can't applaud this Prince Yusupov for he murdered him. He may have been a louse, but he didn't deserve to be murdered in a brutal way. He was murdered. Now he caused a lot of problems for Russia, but you can blame the Tsar for that.
Well,
he was a drunk, and he had this ability to calm people down.
I know. Well, the other thing is, Brian, when you talk about governments. To me, governments are just a form of the church, the hot church hierarchy, which I don't put a whole lot of faith in either one. But the idea of it is, as we said before, and I will maintain, we are in a better position with Joe Biden being president than we are with Donald Trump being president.
Although, again, let's remember when we had our argument with Antonio, he's saying, let there be Trump because I want to have this thing torn down. And I said, that's almost like my idea of let's have a type of COVID, which is even worse because it'll make them. And I'm probably wrong. We always thought that Antonio was wrong on that, and I still to this day think he's wrong. And what you're saying,
my problem is, I have a lot of admiration for anarchists. Why? Because I like outsiders, and they are. I think that it's going to be very hard for government reform. It's going to be all kinds of things. The problem with anarchy is you have to have something to replace it, right? So to be a pure anarchist, you just say, okay, John Holmes,
that's like saying that, the libertarians, they have no foreign policy. They just let things happen, but we know what happens when you have no regulation.
Well, and I said a group, and I will give them all the credit that they deserve, is the Occupy movement. It really was, if Trump was a catalyst for the one side, and he was, I think Occupy was a catalyst for what I consider to be the good guys. And, it got some things in, nobody was talking about the 1%. They put it into the jargon, if you will, of the common person. But the problem with that was naive too, because they didn't have leaders. They're sort of similar to anarchists. Now we argue, and now we're back to Mr. Trump. Is it better to have no leaders, or is it better to put your faith in Trump? So I want to talk about this just for a moment, if I may. Now, I've heard of some dumb things in my life. Every one of us who lives past the age 5 has heard of some dumb things. But, a lot of this prep for work, you and I don't talk, but I have conversations just about every day with my son. in Australia, and he's just itching to get back and take on, American idiocy. But Mr. Trump now, in all these rallies, is saying this basically: don't vote. Don't vote because they stole the election from you. No, 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 no. What he means is they stole the election from me. That's what he's talking about. But these people are identified with that. Now, can you imagine anybody sane I shouldn't say sane, he's not insane. Anybody with any kind of, wow, whatever, I guess logic maybe, whatever, would tell people not to vote? Well, what he's doing is one of two or three things. One is he is so narcissistic that he really thinks when he said only I can fix it, he may well believe that. Although he's, it's his furthest things from the truth.
Well, he's essentially saying the hell with the system, and that's leading toward
I'm gonna,
civil war
I'll cut you
secession.
A little bit different. You're not that far off. He's saying I don't believe the system unless I am the system. That's really what he's saying, Brian. Okay, when he says only I can fix it,
or it's a get out of jail free card by doing it.
Well, that's another part of it. I think, I've always said, and I believe this to be true, and I would defend this belief anywhere. You can tell what people do. You can't tell why they do it, because even people don't always know their motivation for things. But certainly, why is Trump doing it? Is to get out of jail, certainly to his benefit to do that. So he comes along, and this is his exact quote. That's good English, isn't it? So let me read this. If we don't solve the presidential election fraud of 2020, which we have thoroughly and conclusively documented. Let's just stop there. We're halfway through the vote, or halfway through the talk. Fraud. I believe that this will go down as the most examined presidential election.
We know that to be true
in history.
But that doesn't matter.
And there's been
74 million people.
I don't think. I could be off on this, and Mandy, I rely on you and people like you to correct me if I'm wrong. But I haven't read it all. I think they'll find way under 100 cases if you study the whole election of any kind of voter fraud. And they were basically somebody who didn't know or misrepresented themselves. And most of the ones have been found out so far. In fact, I think the first 6 were all Republican. It wasn't like I'm going to defraud. It was, maybe you moved, whatever. Okay. So that's the first case. We know that there was no fraud. It was not rigged. Now, which we have thoroughly and conclusively documented. Show me one piece of documentation. One piece, Mr. Trump, of documentation to support your thoroughly and conclusively documented. You do not have it. Mike Sindel, the jerk-off pillow guy, doesn't have it. Nobody has it. You want to know why, Mr. Trump? Because it doesn't exist. All right, it doesn't exist. Now, notice what he says next, Brian. It's really important. Words matter. I agree with my friends at Planet Word. Republicans will not be voting in 22 or 24. How does he know that? Does he assume his word is going to carry that?
I don't think that's... You see, this is where, and I said this on our group page, David, it relates exactly to what you're saying. Somebody mentioned, will the Republicans go along with Trump? And I said, see, I think Republicans know in most cases, and again, this might be a contradiction to what I was saying about the schizophrenia. But I think in most cases they know that he's a liar, and I think that the greater problem is that they hate the Browning of America.
And there you are.
I'm thinking that in reality we're the real main meal. You're the real main meal. It's nothing. It's just it is personal, but it's against people like us because all great decisions are personal. They will vote because they hate us more than they want Trump in there. They like Trump will do the things that inside their brains that they want to do.
Let's assume for a moment that does happen. What you said, right? Then are people then inside the Republican Party going to confront Trump and say we didn't need you? That's what.
No, they won't confront him. I mean, no.
So because that's what he gets away with. So, and this is the kicker here. After doing the lies, setting up the thing, making untrue statements, making projections that may or not be true, but if they are, is alluding to his own power, cult of personality. Thank you, Living Color. Is this idea, quote, it is the single most important thing for Republicans to do. What we're going to find out, Brian, now that's today. Remember the old saying, we do grab a few cliches and use them because they're true. 24 hours in politics is like 4 years in human lives. I mean, something can turn around that quickly, right? But if things
Republicans
stay,
will not do anything to
right.
jeopardize what they want, and if that means,
Well, is it well? Okay, I'm not. What do we really know? What Republicans? We know, we think, but there's a large percentage of Trump publicans, which make up X percentage of Republicans,
right,
who want one
most,
thing.
but most Republicans are like that.
I don't know. I don't know.
Just, well, you just talk with Republicans, and it's the same spiel. I mean, Democrats overspend. There's no climate change.
I understand that,
you know,
but
minorities aren't working.
I'm not. I can't argue with you what you're saying, but I think you're giving them.
I think you have to look from the bottom up, because it's just like in life. Everything is from the earth up, not strings from coming above. You know.
Have you
down.
seen how many? Have you seen the comments? And they are frequent, saying, "Oh, not just assuming and reading into it. If Jesus said it and Donald Trump said it wasn't true, I would believe Donald Trump over Jesus." There are people that believe that. Okay, there are people that believe that. We don't know how many. It sounds
well. If Jesus is going to help out the browning of America, Jesus is in trouble because his own people are going to kill him.
Well,
they'll kill his ideas.
No,
and ideals.
But what I'm saying is, what we're going to find out in 22, because 24 is 3 lifetimes away. What we're going to find out in 22, and that's why I want to bring this up tonight, is Donald Trump the god of the Republican Party that he thinks he is, or will they do what you say they'll do? They'll vote not so much even for self-preservation, but against the evil of the socialist or communists or lordless, godless Democrats. We'll see that.
Now somebody would see this and say, well, we got a real Marxist here.
Well, then you move on, and the other thing that's going to be fascinating,
you mentioned material there, Dave.
You mentioned earlier, and I think this is another story that's going to be huge for America, and it has more implications even than Donald Trump refusing to testify, is Steve Bannon. Okay. Mm-hmm. I said early on, again, it kind of was proven wrong, that when Trump first emerged, I thought Bannon was running the operation.
Not.
No.
The appearance was there, but he wasn't.
No.
One person. Trump always has one person running the operation.
I understand. No, I understand that's Donald Trump. But I'm just saying, so I was wrong. But Steve Bannon is the consummate anarchist. He doesn't care about putting anything in, right? He just wants to take it down. So he's out there, and he was part of the January 6th attack, just like Trump was. The committee,
there had to be financing. Embassy.
Well, there's all that stuff. The committee has said, come in, testify. They issued an order. Tuesday night, that committee will get together. It's a committee of 9. I think it's 9. Seven Democrats, 2 Republicans, both of whom voted against Trump in different eyes, one being Liz Cheney. So it's pretty much assured that committee will say, charge him with criminal action for disregarding that subpoena. Now, the argument holds on something that will get to the Supreme Court if either side doesn't like the findings, I think. And that is something that's never really been defined clearly in American history. What exactly are the limitations, if any, of executive privilege? And when does executive privilege end? Okay. So how does that apply to Bannon? Well, currently that's what his attorney is saying. He will not testify because he will not violate the executive privilege given to him by the White House, which he falls under. There is a problem with that. While he did work for the White House, in January 6th, he was no longer working for the White House on the books. All right? On the books. So, you have again a false legal claim. But it's in such a nebulous area that could it be that once you work for the president and he wants to invoke executive privilege of anything you know or say, that'll hold for a lifetime? Now we do have some indication of how Joe Biden feels. Joe Biden has already broken, which I think is great, a kind of verbal agreement among presidents that executive privilege, does somewhat apply to all presidents. What are you doing, Brian? I
So
worry
he was
because
asking me about this, and I thought I'd get a picture of Karl Marx and his wife.
okay. No,
She
I
looks
was
like
worried.
Stormy Daniels. You might want to see it.
Well, that's who I was talking about
Control
earlier in the show,
yourself,
and you
Dave.
missed that. Anyway, to finish off here with Mr. Bannon and executive privilege. So if it goes to Supreme Court right now, we have to say, yeah, well, nobody looked real happy then because you weren't allowed. Well, there's a
No,
convention.
that's
Brian, we're
that's a
talking-
cultural difference.
that there you are. That's
inside the United
nobody
States,
smiled. No, nobody.
You
No,
consider
nobody
kind of
smiled
weird
in-
when you start smiling.
Nobody smiled in those pictures ever, right?
It's considered
It
to
would
be
be-
phony.
Yeah, it was great. Well, I mean, that was something. That was the what? That was the whatever the new technology is of our time. That was the new technology of their time, and everybody said, "Look at this." Yeah, and there you are, Bella. Executive privilege was never meant to mean imperial, and of course, there's a book. The title is better than the book, called "The American Imperial Presidency," and
All kinds of gunshots outside. I hear. Jesus.
that you're in hunter territory. That's not anything.
Gotta
Other
put
than-
holes through
So,
turkeys
so,
and stuff
so,
like that.
what? Here's some
Ferment
things, Brian. I
animals.
said before, it's worse than it says. Do you have any idea if number one, if and there's two big ifs here. If they, well, I don't think it's iffy. They will ask for criminal charges to be filed. Do you know what the penalty is for defying a subpoena to Congress? I wouldn't expect you to. I didn't before I researched it.
Some form of prison.
You didn't. You refused.
Waterboarding. Decapitation. I don't
No,
know.
God, no.
I'm just
100,000
joking. But,
I know.
yeah.
$100,000 fine.
Good. That'll work.
No, it won't. Not on Steve Bannon. He can raise that in less than a millisecond. Okay.
I keep finding him every day.
No. Maximum one-time fine.
Oh, really?
Maximum $100,000 and up to 1 year in jail. Well, hell, if you're a true believer, you can take that. The money won't come out of his pocket, and the jail time. I mean, I think if he is the person I think he is, he would do that. He would do that because he's trying to, another martyr for the cause. But Brian, here's the thing, and we get back to your friend Merrick Garland in the Department of Justice.
You're right, Bill.
The biggest if is if they will even pursue charges. The last time, and I think this is I found this interesting. I don't know if anybody else will. It just might be me. Excuse me. The last time the Department of Justice took any action like this was in 1983 with a lady named Rita Lavelle. And Rita was a former Environmental Protection Agency official who refused to testify because she was being investigated for her mismanagement of $1.6 billion that couldn't be accounted for of hazardous waste cleanup that was funded at the APA. Now, first of all, Congress did vote, right? The committee came out and they voted, Brian. Imagine this, ladies and gentlemen. This was as recently as 83, by a 413-0 vote to pursue the criminal charges against her. It took the Department of Justice 8 days to announce the indictment, right? Which they'd already done the investigation of. So they held off on that. And she was found not guilty when it's done. So, wow. But I do think it's sort of like I say here, we have no idea, Brian, whether we're going to win or not in this battle. We don't. I don't care what anybody says.
Yeah, it's like
But the
1941, but we really don't know whether we're going to win. This one we could
no, and
lose.
we don't. But we don't know we're going to lose. And so the proper thing for each individual to do in situations like this is pick a side, hope you pick the right one, and then do whatever you can to make sure you're. I don't want to say that.
I'll say this
Make
though:
sure.
Biden is frustrating because he seems
Well,
so weak. Just
we know that. We know that. We know that. That's not. We're not. I'm not propping up Joe Biden. I think again, we're talking tonight. It's kind of there's always a theme emerges in this show, whether we intend it or not. And I think it's the things that influence us. He's a victim of a time. He might be one of the perfect reasons why you do need some form of term limits in age. Not that he's senile, not that he has dementia, but he remembers a time fondly when you could sit. I mean, that's 1983. That's not 1863. I
well,
just mentioned.
I was as I explained today to a Russian. She said, he said, Brian, you made the comment that it was different 40 years ago in the United States. She said, well, certainly different now than it was 40 years ago in the Soviet Union. And I said, it was absolutely different because then she said, well, what was the difference? People still congressmen lied and all that. I said, yeah, but there was some personal dignity. I mean, for example, with Nixon, I mean, they realized, that, look, this guy was doing something wrong and they did the right thing. Now, there's no personal dignity.
There's like I say, there's no. I just come down to a person. There's no Barry Goldwater. Nobody in American history has been more conservative in the strict view of conservatism than Barry Goldwater, and he came through. So, what about this Bannon thing? Well, we're going to find out. And so, so I said before, what is that? Just no. Well, I think we're going to find out now some things we needed to know before. What are the limits of executive privilege? And that's
Again,
important
won't
to know.
that be, factored by what the Supreme Court decides?
There you are. There you are.
So
and again,
we go back to this semantic fiat. It almost goes straight up to the top.
Well, look, if you're implying, and you weren't implying anything, but I'm going to take an inference from what you said and make it an implication. If you were to ask me of the three branches of government, which one would I rather have control of, right? The Supreme Court every day of the week, every damn day of the week, because they're the one group that can't be reversed. They're not the alpha, they're the omega of law. And they're not always right. And a 5-4 vote, no matter which side gets it, along political lines, whether it's liberals or conservatives, that's not fiat. That's not definitive. 6-3 isn't, and I think what you're going to see is a lot more 5-4 votes as Roberts tries to not
What do
do
you
the
think
right
of this
thing.
comment, Dave, from you? And
What?
'cause I don't
Well,
think you agree with that.
I don't. Well, I'll say this. There aren't limits if you don't put them on. You say, well, of course, what are you talking about, Dave? That's stupid. Well, they were put on Richard Nixon, right? They weren't put on Donald Trump. Have times changed? Are we closer to the king? We talked earlier about King James. Are we closer to making... Now, before we canonize Barack Obama was, I think, will go down as a good president, if nothing else for the two he was sandwiched in between. But, there were things he continued to do, avoid Congress, in terms of undeclared wars. Read the Constitution says only Congress has the power to declare war. So how do they get around it? They declare an undeclared war. Well, if you're sending troops and bombing, what the hell's that? A police action like Korea? Police action. Well, So,
Anthony, I'm gonna disagree with that. It hasn't completely shut him up, but if you look at what MSNBC showed some wonderful graphics about his message and how many people have received it, and if you looked at that in terms of when he had his Twitter accounts and his Facebook, this and that, it's gone down. I mean, it's enraging him, and he obviously does.
And you have to remember, Anthony, I'm not picking on you. I'm just saying this. There are no censorship laws applied directly, yes, indirectly, but directly to anything other than the federal government and later, by extension, the state government. A business can do whatever they want. Then you can find them legally, liable. But they can say, no shirt, no shoes, no business, right? So, and I'll tell you, Brett, I really struggle with that. Because I said, in one sense, I do share something with the Second Amendment absolutionists. I believe that free speech is almost an absolute right, but that presupposes a couple things. It presupposes that there are enough people who will listen to it when it's false free speech and identified as such. And 74 million Americans lack that ability, and that's a little too close for comfort. I would like someday, maybe we'll devote a whole show, if we ever can get it, to the idea of free speech. And this is a place I'll go after liberals too. Liberals, everybody wants free speech for their group, but not free speech for everybody's group. And a lot of times the ACLU gets pilloried for defending the big one. One of the big ones, they're still, that's still referred to defending the Nazis marching in Skokie, Illinois. And I think they made the right decision. I think they did. Because the problem with censorship is who censors the censors? Who determines what you say? And this is my problem with Facebook and Twitter. Do I really want Mark Zuckerberg deciding who can say what? And
what is a private company? I mean, we can't do anything about it.
Well, I know, I understand that. But is that private company really a private company anymore? Right? I mean, yes, it is, but I'm just saying. So one of the things that I don't think you can underestimate is how social media has changed the world in ways positive and negative. I just don't think you can underestimate that. And so what you have to look at, I have a problem with the Constitution simply because it's an old document written by flawed people in a very flawed time. How does that carry through? But even more than that, I think there are just moments. One moment was the atomic, when we entered the atomic age, and we're still in that, all right? And another moment was this social media that essentially, I don't know if it changes the human condition, but it certainly changes how people interact and react with each other in government. Dave is a product of his environment, which is limited, absolutely.
We all,
there's no argument with that. And so I am who I am. Brian and I argue with this all the time. I believe in some.
We are all doing the best we can, whether we know it or not, given the situation.
And Brian, you're much more of a determinist, and I do believe there is such a thing as free will. And you and I aren't going to argue that tonight. We argue that enough. And one of us is probably right, and the other one is wrong, and that's fine. It doesn't matter. But I think anyone who says you're not,
I'm not saying. Let's say this much. I think it almost doesn't matter, the argument, because even if you are like a determinist like myself, we still feel pain, and we still play it out as though it were free will.
It doesn't matter, right? I mean, really, it's just something.
But I think getting back to what he said was, we are all products of our environment, of the things that have been hitting us. Dave will not change on his own, nor will you, or you, or you, or you, or you. We will
and that
become
gets
a
back
product
to something
of what
we
hits
said
us.
earlier. For me, it's clear. I mean, it's very clear in my life. And they were contradictory ideas, and I love it. My mother and father, and they were very different people. Just short version, my mother, if there is such a thing as a true Christian, she was it. My father, to my knowledge, never set foot in a church other than probably to marry my mother. She was referred to kind of as a saint. She was an educator, worked in, my father was a gambler by profession, some other things. But that idea, I mean, that shapes you. Sure it does. But, I just think it's interesting as we all, why else would it exist? I mean, human, I know that's what you're saying. I mean, yeah, you're right. And yet there, I would argue falsely that I'm not influenced by commercials.
And by the way, this show is a prime example. Dave and I are lock and step about this show. You are not going to see, we haven't done anything that would make any suggestion that we're looking for something from anybody. We lose money on this. I mean,
Oh yeah,
this
which is fine.
something we
This is
believe in,
yeah,
and that's what you're not going to get with most shows. There's usually something behind it where they want something, and there's nothing worse than I have to watch, a 45-second or a minute commercial for something that I'm only going to see for 30 seconds. It makes me want to vomit.
Well, you know what?
And I'm not
It's funny,
saying people don't deserve to be paid for what they do, but you can't have 100 million YouTube channels out there all trying to get a piece of the pie from Google. No, you're not getting it here, and Google doesn't like us. We're like the people who pay off our credit card bills. We're straggling on. They want you out because they're not making money on you.
And we all have differing views on commercial TV. I don't watch commercial TV for a number of reasons, but I am fascinated. So this is just me. I'm not recommending it to anybody else. I am fascinated with the second part of this year's American Horror.
Oh, I remember the first series. It was interesting.
The first, you watched the first 8 episodes?
Suit. I remember, I probably watched the first
Not just
3.
now. Well, this 10th season.
No, I'm sorry.
But anyway,
I haven't watched it.
No, I know. No, but what I do like is it speaks to me, and if anybody if you want to watch it, it's you can if you don't have to. But what I find fascinating is basically this, Brian, distilled down. It takes so many, the Marilyn Monroe death, Amelia Earhart's disappearance, and lays it at the fact that Dwight Eisenhower, quotes, made a deal with the aliens for technology, and the aliens have been working behind the scenes all this time, involved in the Kennedy assassination, involved in the face. Now, of course, the two gentlemen who are responsible, I mean, they poke fun at everything. And of course they have a gay sensibility, and they like to poke heterosexual people, by showing them supposedly shocking things. But, and I think they're also, in my take, there are people that are going to walk away from that show saying, see, I told you so, right? But I take it for the satire, the thing that it is. But we do know that there are things that we don't know about government. And this gets back, now we'll just bring it back for one last comment on executive privilege. As a person, you should probably agree that there are certain things, very, very limited, that the president should be able to do, that the public should not find out about it at the time they're done, right? It's sort of like the FBI announcing the raid before they go. But I can't think of anything that shouldn't be known after it's done. The documents exist, and it should be minimal, and it hasn't been. Barack Obama employed it a lot, but people like Barack Obama said, oh, it's okay. Well, now Trump is going to employ it, and it's that way again. Now, one more thing, politically quick. I live and you live in interesting states this year.
By the way, I want to have a shout out to our school where you used to work and I work. Christian High School beat my alma mater, Cherry Hill East, today, 41-7, and they beat Cherry Hill West 2 weeks ago. So they beat Cherry Hills, both schools.
Well,
handily.
Do you really find that odd?
Bridgeton.
Since you moved from Cherry Hill to Bridgeton, I've beaten you in everything we've ever tried. I mean, intellectually, academically, no. Good job, Bulldogs. But what you and I share this time is we live in states where there's a gubernatorial race. Now, we don't hear much here about New Jersey. I mean, in general, I follow it because, of course, living in New Jersey for 59 years, I just want to follow this. But it appears that Governor Murphy is going to be reelected. Is that true?
Well, we hope.
Polls, does all indications indicate that at this point?
They see him up, but not quite what most people would think he would.
Do you know? I'm just putting you on the spot. Do you know any idea what the last? And they vary poll.
Well, let's do it right now, and I'll look.
All right, and while you're doing that, I'll talk to Virginia. Virginia, is considered to be the newest blue state. That's how it's viewed. It was once red. And now suddenly it's supposed to be blue. given the number of people living in the area that I live, Northern Virginia, outweighing those in the other sections of Virginia, which are closer to North Carolinians down south, and to the, what would that be, east, West Virginia.
48-40, Dave.
Oh yeah, that's pretty safe. Now down here, it's gone from, and again, I'm just announcing this because I'm getting so tired of what I consider to be poor journalism, and I think I can speak to that, even though again, people could say, well, that was years ago, but first of all, everybody has a different poll commissioned. They don't, I mean, I would never believe a poll released by any political party. And most of them now have these, and even to some extent, and think tanks have them now, because it used to just be Roper, Gallup, and Harris. And they were fairly believable if you got the right sample. One of the things, sampling size now. For years, Brian, the samples were off because they didn't interview anyone who had a cell phone. And now, I would assume probably if more than half of Americans do not have a landline. I would assume that, right?
It's turning out that way.
Yeah, thank you. They do. It's a nice place to live here in that, and that's one of the reasons.
Thankfully, they live there.
Terry McAuliffe against Trumpkin, Youngkin. But now Trumpkin's done an interesting thing, the Republican candidate. He is walking a line between accepting Trump's help. For example, Bannon came here to speak for him, and trying to be this independent of him, but he doesn't want to alienate, that extreme right and the middle. But the problem is, if you go to them, you're not going to get the suburbs necessarily, which is, again, that you have to have the suburbs in order to win. But the other thing is, it's not necessarily as predictive as people would want it, because the Democratic candidate, Mr. Terry McAuliffe, has been governor before, and you make enemies when you're governor, right? So, but again, the media, the politicians have said, this is the test case. So everybody look at what happens in Virginia. I know how I voted. Virginia has one of the best opportunities to vote of any state in the union. Judy and I voted on September 20, I think it was the 23rd. They opened the poll, the early voting, and we voted on the 24th. So, I mean, we know who, but again, we're 2 votes. So we'll see. And then on the last comment I have tonight, and then, get some more stuff from the people. But were you following it all, Brian? Because I know that's the area you come from. Were you following the week-long demonstrations here in terms of the environment at all, just a little bit?
I know you mentioned there were a lot of arrests.
Well, here's what happens, okay? Now, once again, we look to the indigenous people to lead this, and they are becoming a real force, as they've always been. I mean, the view was they were kind of
care about them. I know that.
What? I'm sorry?
Joe Manchin doesn't care about them at all.
Joe Manchin cares about power, and Joe Manchin. So really, they set up this action called the People versus Fossil Fuel Mobilization. And I like that in the sense that was their tactic, right? All week long, we're going to focus on this one area. Now, some people would say, I'm not going to go that because I believe it's X, Y, Z, other stuff. When you can't narrow it down, but they took a narrow focus. They staged 5 days of protests, of varying types of protests, on Indigenous People Day or Columbus Day, whatever you call it. That was about the environmental injustice being done on the reservations with the pipelines. And of course, the person they were attacking primarily was President Biden. And that's fine. Their argument is the age-old argument. President Biden promised certain things and is not delivering on them. Now, you've said, and I think you're kind of right, he at least is talking the right way, but for some people, and a growing number of people, it's beyond the talking stage. We are in a crisis. We're going to die. And I don't think, and I could be wrong, I don't think we're going to die in equal ways. I think the poor will die first and the richest will die last. If nothing else, Jeff Bezos will build a few of those penis-shaped and we'll escape somewhere or something. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. But what is here is the number of arrests. 655 people arrested over 5 days. Right. Sounds like a lot. It's not. It was a large percentage of the people. But again, they were led by, and this is where the hope was, if we're going to change things. Very few people in our age group, Brian, are going to change at this point. They're either liberal or conservative. They either believe in climate change or they don't. They either believe in systemic racism or they think it's a bunch of hooey. They buy critical race theory and it shouldn't be banned. They do that. They feel that any book like Fahrenheit 451 should be banned. Anything that disagrees with their worldview or their religious view, anything that disagrees with their analysis of gender, that there's only two, a man and a woman, that's never been true. There's a fluidity that the Eastern cultures understand. Now, we can get into should they name them all, and suddenly, it was gay people, and then it's lesbians and gays, kind of separating, not separating, but saying women are lesbians, men are gays. Then it was B, bisexual, okay, and then we add T, transgender, and they're all legitimate categories. Queer, and now I think there's two more letters, and that's fine. But suddenly it becomes kind of unwieldy. And for people who don't, they're making this up. You're seeing, but anyway, back to this idea of them attacking young people. That is their world now, Brian. They don't really look at gender the way we did. They are the ones that, all the baby boomers, we were subjected to those stupid bomb securities and that kind of thing in the atomic age. And it just still seemed kind of unreal, as real as it was. But the fact that in every American student goes off with the idea, today I might not come home because somebody with a gun might come in my class. So they've got that. And I think if you looked at that, they said most all of the protesters were under 30, and some were as young as 10. So, that's the hope. We're not the hope, Brian. I mean, my generation. There's very few left, right? So we haven't been successful.
Well,
so now we have to
talk about a famous blonde you frequently talk about.
Oh, not Stormy. You don't mean Marsha, do you?
You're smart, Dave. I have to show it, Dave. Okay, I have to show it. All right. Let's just listen to this for a second, folks. I'm going to put on loop back. It might be a little bit of Dave, they won't hear you right now. But I want you to hear how, I mean, this is basically what the Republicans' game plan is. Don't talk about any policies whatsoever. And it's very effective. They're just trashing Democrats. That's it. So why don't you listen to this, Dave, and then we'll come back in a minute. All right?
While the Democrats and Joe Biden are forcing people to be fired from their jobs and people to quit because of their tyrannical vaccine mandates, Congress can't get their act together because they can't figure out how to make a budget that doesn't put Americans in debt and Americans to be forced into slavery for energy to China. Well, Nancy Pelosi has called us all back to Congress because we have to vote on the debt ceiling. While your businesses closed down and our economy was shut down and our border is wide open and they abandoned Americans in Afghanistan, armed the Taliban, and got 13 innocent soldiers killed for absolutely no reason, Nancy Pelosi and the rest of the Democrats want us to be here in Washington to vote to raise the debt ceiling. That's because they don't know how to balance a checkbook and they only know how to keep America in debt. Well, I just went in to call for a motion to adjourn because I think Congress should go home. Everything Congress is doing is hurting the American people. Well, Nancy Pelosi came in, put the House in recess so that I couldn't make a motion to adjourn and so that no one else could even give a 1-minute speech. That's how bad Nancy Pelosi is. She's the most failed leader, the worst Speaker of the House in American history. We need to send Nancy Pelosi back home. She's been here long enough.
Okay. We'll come back, Dave.
Okay. This is my first comment. It's going to be sexist, so I apologize to women everywhere before I make it. If I have to look at somebody while they speak, I'm still going to go with Lauren Boebert, because she wears the high heels and the gun on her hip.
Oh, I've got her too. So if you want to
I
see
can't
her.
listen to any of. I mean, again, well,
But this
why-
attack, it's always the same
but that's
propaganda.
but it's a fact. Look, how many people in your lifetime have you heard say, "I'm so tired of those negative ads"? They wouldn't run them if they weren't
Right,
effective.
right.
And here's the other thing: it is much easier to attack the other side than it is to promote your own side. The Republicans have no plans. I've said it before. I wish it
Zero.
was my original. I wish it was original thought with me. It's not. There are two teams. If you want to equate it to football, fine. One is on offense. That's the Democrats. One is on defense. When the defense, all they're trying to do is stop what the offense is doing, right? And if they do get the ball, they don't know what to do with it, right? They're not geared for that. And if you think about it, I've been thinking about this a little bit too, so I'd be interested in your thoughts. By nature, by the very words, conservatives want to keep, right? They want to freeze or go back. That's what a conservative does by being a conservative.
Reactionary.
Right. Liberals liberate, free, maybe move forward, be more tolerant, be more acceptable. And right now, America is divided between three groups because there's just not enough true Republicans. Basically, conservatives now equate to those who believe in Donald Trump. Liberals are those who mostly are found in the Democratic Party. And you've got the third group, just leave me alone, right? If I really had to say the ones that I have the least respect for, it would be the leave me alones. It really would, because this is not one of those. You can't sit this one out. You can't. It's too important to everyone. And for you to say it doesn't matter, they're all the same. Well, it does matter, and it's not all the same. So what are the possible outcomes? I don't see, with that larger number of people sitting out, there's only three possible outcomes. We win, they win, right? Or we go year to year in local elections, every 2 years in federal elections, and every 4 years in presidential elections, just wiping the slate clean and starting over. What did Donald Trump do the first day?
Or we see them take over with this coup, and then they completely take it all, and then there will be no back and forth.
They win, or we win.
Isn't that a terrible position to be in, though, if they win?
Well,
then we never go back.
Well, yeah, of course. I mean, yeah. I mean,
can't go back home after that.
Let me say this. It was never ordained, and notice I used a religious word. It was never ordained that America would last forever. It never was. You have to work at it. You have to believe in it. You have to work for it. You can make a very strong argument that for so many groups of people, women as a group, African Americans as a group,
Native Americans
as a group, gay people as a group, and the list could go on. Immigrants have never really been part of the supposed American dream. Then there's the question of what is the American dream? Is the American dream as was kind of described? And really, in essence, the American dream was a few things. It was having a house, right, that you could afford, that would appreciate and you could be your main asset in life later. Not happening everywhere in the country. It was so your children could do better academically and economically than you can. I don't know if that's viable anymore with the factories closed. The idea of greed has always been there, but is there anything stop being manufacturing right now? No, it's just being manufactured someplace else where they can get away with slave labor.
Right.
It's not like, and then you can flip that on the side. Are you willing to pay? I don't know what you paid for your new phone, your iPhone. I don't need to know. But are you willing to pay 7 times that, or 5 times that, or 4 times that? To be in America. There was an interesting article this week I ran across, and again, I'm still trying to figure out if it's true. They said, look at television, and I said, I don't watch a lot of it, but I watch enough of it, or no, I follow it, to say there's only 2 types of people being represented now on television. This is either the very rich or the very poor. And they talked about historically from, Lucille Ball, Father Knows Best, all those shows on region, middle class America was what was portrayed. And I think there's a reason for that. Middle class America doesn't exist. You're either in the 1% or close enough that you're far removed from poverty, or you're in poverty and close enough in the middle class to say the loss of a few things could do your income. One of the big stories, I don't know, I know that every place in DC, literally that you walk by, has a help wanted sign up, right? They're talking about the great jobs walk away. And it's not just, first they said, well, it's McDonald's. No, I mean, it's all over. People are walking away.
And I am actually happy they are, because it's time to force the wages up.
Well,
because the Republicans were unwilling to increase the federal wage.
Absolutely.
This is what they deserve.
On the other hand, you have to look at the whole picture, but the small part. I always, as I mentioned before, I just think it's a fun exercise to always know, hopefully within a matter of a week, but usually might be a couple weeks further, to know, just as a balance, what the most expensive restaurant in Washington, D.C. charges. For the longest time, it was $265, then it went to $275, then it went to $285, and this is per person, drinks and tip not included. And now it went over, and it became $315. But it doesn't stop there. There is a special white truffle edition of that you can get for $685 a person. Again, not including drinks and tips.
I can't afford the tip.
Who could? I mean, but people obviously can. They're not going to do that if because people who have money want to show that they have it, and they have an insensitivity. I mean, I live in, I will say this. Jeff Bezos, now I make sure I get mine every day. Jeff Bezos, Amazon, not Jeff Bezos, has a banana cart. And they give away free bananas. Okay, I still got to figure out why he chose bananas, but it's kind of cool. I don't have to buy bananas. So Judy and I go every day and get two, and then for a friend of ours, a couple of friends, if they want one, we get them and drop them off at work. But does, what was the line? I can't remember the song. Maybe you do. And when you leave, or when you come home from space, it's the same old place, or something like that, from the 60s, early 70s. And, Bezos has decided, and of course his thing is, someday, we'll need to leave the planet. Well, you're certainly not helping right now down here. Neither is Elon Musk, who I have no idea what he's just beyond perverse. Bill Gates, I think you have to give him some props for, at least doing some things that he thinks is important, that are important. I mean, he has been fairly active in helping with disease in Africa and some other places. But the rich have to be taxed. I mean, it's very simple, Brian. To me, it's very simple. And you're right. Who doesn't want them to tax? Now, we don't have many Democrats.
Even that's not enough. I mean, you can talk about things like legacy wealth, and we've talked about that ad infinitum. But I think it comes down generally to leverage, and obviously people with money have more leverage than people who don't have money. They're the ones who get the loans. How do you change the leverage? And that goes through the banking system. For example, the banking system, they're the ones who create money. I mean, in reality.
Now, it's interesting you should mention that. Now, everybody cringes when you say this because of the current head of the Postal Service. But, there's a move to allow post offices to become banks. I don't know if you're aware of that.
Well, at one time I thought that state banks did do something like that years ago. I mean, state postal service, like stamps could be used as money at one time.
Well, this idea would be that you could, and of course the idea, the positive idea is, well, they're controlled by laws that allow, that don't allow discrimination and those types of things where businesses aren't. Of course, the other problem is government. Government is bureaucratic and slow and bad. And Brian, I know a lot of people who are lower level workers in government, and none of them are bad, but I know their agencies don't produce. So where the hell does it break down? I don't know. Is it, then back to these people leaving work, which we were talking before, unions protect unions? Yes. Unions can be just as bad as management.
Right.
But they are the buffer. They're the
Right. Well, we
seesaw
have.
that
If it wasn't for the union school, we wouldn't have
seesaw
a
that tries to.
40-hour work week
Well,
and
we didn't have any of that.
overtime and all. So yeah. I mean, look, there's Jimmy Hoffa, and then there's
Yeah.
Eugene Debs. I mean, there's
Oh,
just
and in unions, there's all these police unions that are fighting against a
Right, they're
mandatory
corrupt.
vaccination. But that's just. I mean, to me,
and don't forget those same unions. These unions that you could speculate on what they're actually doing. These are the ones who started voting for Reagan, and that's a problem too. These are the white conservatives, the Archie Bunkers of the world, who aren't
Right.
making squat, and then they're just.
But you know what's funny, and I wonder about this. You mentioned Archie Bunker. Now, of course, I watched that show. I remember friends of mine saying, "Boy, that's Meathead is you, and Archie's your dad," and there was some truth to that. Just in terms of
There's my
the
chat
generational gap that was there. But there was something interesting or a human about Archie that I don't find today with the Archie Bunkers. If you pick the Archie Bunker of today, whoever that is, that character, it wouldn't be. So something again has changed, and that's what we're dealing with. And I think that is one of Mr. Biden's failings. I think, I think in climate protests, I don't think we have a lot of time, and I think the young people are right. And yes, you can say it's a worldwide this and that other, but if America takes the lead, and it should, and we're not going to, because blue team on the left, red team on the right, and the world is watching us as we are torn apart by this game. And Anthony, you're absolutely right. And they're watching through a couple sets of feelings, at least the people that I've met and have some still talking to, and not a lot, not like Brian. I mean, Brian, you talk to the Russians every week, but they're
And I'm
looking
getting
at
different viewpoints from them.
Right.
Like, I get some
Yeah,
say that we're not
HLS, you and
political
I-
people, and then all of a sudden, I don't know what they're talking about because
But
they're
I
just as
think-
fucked up as we are.
Well, I think there's a couple things. I think on one hand, since we have been the big guy for so long, some are saying it's time for them to fall. But the same way, we were the symbol, especially to countries that weren't here, or people that weren't here in other countries, of the chance of freedom surviving. Mom and child care, I think I'm assuming that's talking about the idea of mothers. I mean, with child care, it should be universal. It should be available. It should be just something that goes, with work. Either employers should be responsible, or the government, or someone, because you can't. What do you do with a child? What do you do with them if both people work? In our case, we were very fortunate. When our son was little, my mother by that time had retired. We had a 24/7. We didn't abuse it, but this kind of thing. Now, I have a question to everybody out there to ponder this week. Okay. And that question is this. I look at your comments every week, and not because I don't agree with all of them. I agree with the majority, vast majority, I guess, if you really want to add that thing there. So it would be interesting if we all could get together, which we can't, and just say, how do we get to this point where we see the world this way and they see the world the other way? I'm just fascinated with that question. You said it earlier, Brian. We all have friends, we have family, so it goes beyond. I mean, family shares DNA, friends share the raising, the community. I've seen intellectual people who can make an argument for. I mean, I don't. But what do we share? Not you and I, but I'm saying this collectively. What is it that makes us? And I think I don't know. This group that would come to this are more left than the moderate Democrats. Okay.
Right.
I mean, I accept, for lack of anything better, as I said before, and it don't even matters to me.
And even though they are far to the left, understand they know that we're considered far to the left of the conservative Democrats.
Oh my God, yes. Well, I mean, do you think Reagan? I mean, Reagan would be a leftist. Nixon would definitely be a leftist. I mean, he did all, EPA, ties with China, things that he felt only he could do. Yeah. I like that, and but that's another thing. I guess we can kind of, we're starting to wind down. We got to take our, like I said, there's humor in Archie, and Meathead. I don't know that there's humor today with us and them. I don't see it. I don't find it in my own.
No,
I
it's
mean,
not funny. All you have to do is look at January 6th, and then
I'm not interested in. Oh, that was the thing. I forgot. Thank you. I mentioned, Virginia and Bannon coming at that rally. This is what the lead speaker said. We have a special flag here tonight that we're going to pledge allegiance to. It was a flag that was flown by the Patriots on January 6th at the Capitol. Exact words. And the place erupted. Right? Wow. How show me any example in American history of any type of takeover of the Capitol that Patriots did it. Now, of course, on their side, Brian, and this is a scary thing, they believe that America is corrupt and everything it says, and they if you talk to them, and a lot of them believe it's time for another revolution, just like it was time. And they're saying just like the first one. They're equating the powers that be, the Democrats, or as out of step as King George and the Brits were in the 1700s. They're wrong. Okay. But then again, I don't think those young protesters getting arrested were that wrong. They were attacking the Democrats for inability. They were attacking Biden. I know it's not easy, but damn it, what have the Democrats really accomplished? Right? Tell me. I mean, I'm open, except being better than, Joe Biden is a better person than Donald Trump. And the other side of that, you can't expect the president to solve all your ills.
Well, this is the system itself. They can't accomplish.
There you are. So what do we need to do? And we go to every show this way. It sounds very simple, but you're going to say, and you're absolutely right. If I say it, I'm going to say it to you. You're going to say it to me. We need to eliminate the Electoral College. First of all, I would eliminate the filibuster. That's the most important thing to get government back. So a 50 to 49 vote, or a 51 to 49 vote, whatever it is sufficient, or a 51 to 50 vote is sufficient. But just as important as Electoral College, we need to look at gerrymandering, and we need to get money out of politics with the Citizens United. And on top of all that, we need to make a world where my grandchildren can live. And I mean that literally live, not just survive. So Proud Boys need to stand back and stand down. Did you ever think, Bri, we laugh at that one, but I mean, a president of the United States said that. A president of the United States. And on top of that, it was shared by 74 million voting Americans. They talk about everything else they want to, but in the end, they're aligned with the side of the Proud Boys.
Well, I saw that January 6th coming a long time ago, but when I saw what Kyle Rittenhouse did, and you could high-five the policeman, they can give him water, I knew it was all lost. And this goes back to how we started the show, and then they play this game of just bleeding the time out. And again, it gets into this concept that I have about the meantime. I mean, yeah, maybe we'll even win this thing. Maybe it is 1941 and 1945 is going to happen. But what's the sense if we're going to have to just grin and bear it? We lose everything in time. And I guess it is worth it, because this is just the way life is. There are things that are worth fighting for, and there's things that are not worth fighting for. The things dying for, there's things worth living for. But this one is one that's worth dying for. And Dave, you mentioned today, we were talking about my future.
There you are, Mandy. Excellent point.
Yeah, well, like I said, but to get something like that done, you're going to think I'm crazy, but that's about right now. The chance of something like that happening is a chance that I'll have godlike powers, and I can turn to Godzilla, and I can go down to Washington, and I can grab Joe Manchin and put him in my hand and squeeze him till the pus comes out of his ears. It's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. What's going to happen is what's happening right now. Nothing much except gridlock, and if anything, the Republicans, as Dave said, they have that Supreme Court. They have the 5-4. They actually have the 6-3.
Right down the road. But I'm saying, yeah, I'm not
So
certainly
unless
on the
you have
table
somebody that
6-3.
croaks,
At best,
and
we
even
get
then,
5-4.
let's just suppose 3 conservatives croak tonight, right, on the Supreme Court. You still have to get those 3 appointees, approved. And right now, I don't see anything like that happening. You and I, the collective you and the I, we are going to have to mentally be able to deal with this thing. And one of the things we do is we meet on Saturday nights, and we're essentially commiserating. And I think that's what we do to survive, because there's no way out. We're on that train to nowhere. And
hard.
And this is life. Dave was mentioning Bezos, saying, he's trying to leave the earth and blah, blah, blah. You know what? Our entire earth goes when we die. I mean, our entire universe, everything in our existence. This is the saddest thing about death, is that everything we've worked for, that incline up to trying to become a better person, and then once we die,
wait a minute,
the entire universe is blown out of there.
Are you telling me there's no streets paved with gold in a heaven that's up there, although we can look into eons of time and space and haven't found it? Are you telling me that's not true, bro?
I'm telling you, as Lenny Bruce said, the truth is what is. And everything else is a terrible, terrible lie. And what the truth is what we've experienced. And before we were born, you can't remember anything of it. And can't we be mature? Can't we get serious and just say, in all likelihood, this is it. Okay? It was a ride that we had to take.
Is that a rhetorical question, or is that an absolute question?
Well, this is why.
If it's an absolute question, it's because people can't accept death in any form. And so one form of not accepting death is to say there's something after death. Now that
right,
isn't,
well,
I don't think,
the only thing we have
sense to me.
is, within this finite.
We got to save that one. That's got to be.
In my father's house are many mansions, and all of your lost socks. Yeah.
I love that.
But I'm saying is that we live in a finite line,
right?
But it's kind of like a musical line, and you can push the notes. Dave and I know this from being musicians.
Right.
You can't extend the length of the song. Well, we did, but in terms of the bars.
Right.
But you understand what I'm saying? We can only push time within it. There are things that we can do.
Yeah,
you hope that you have, the good experiences rather than the bad experiences. And this is why there are times you just have to say, I'm going to enjoy myself without trying to hurt anybody else.
And I mean that's the trick, because
it's going to go, and then one day. The greatest thing is, the saddest thing is, was it John Donne or was it Shakespeare said would be what could have been, the regrets of the worst. When as you get older, the regrets as you look past, when your past becomes bigger.
And while I think all people have them to a certain degree, you can't let them define or limit you, and the regrets that you have until you do your last breath. What? Unless you're
Bill Bruford, he's like a machine gun. He and Robert Palmer, yeah.
No, not
Carl Palmer. Carl Palmer. Shit,
Yeah,
got it wrong.
That's okay.
He was like a machine gun, wasn't he, Carl Palmer?
Brian, I got to give you credit when you say something brilliant, which I think you.
That's
I think
the last
you did that. No. I'm just saying, and you're saying some support for that. Listen to the silence between the musical notes. That's been said a million times. B.B. King probably said it best. It's not the notes you play; it's the notes you don't play that makes music interesting. But when you talk about that, I was just thinking about that. You're talking about jazz and improvisation. Yeah, I mean, there are limits to that, right? I mean, certain things, and maybe if you want to think of somebody as coming from another planet, I make fun of you doing that. It might be, I suppose you could say Miles, but I think even more John Coltrane. He wasn't of this earth. I mean, the things he was able to do.
Coltrane is like. He's like the sixth orgasm. I mean, he's well above,
Yeah, but I'm just saying. But when you say that, like that jazz, or if you're in the rock vein, the jam bands, you're kind of doing within this, that you're taking it somewhere, and that's more a liberal approach, right? Finding some notes that go together or something different. And then the conservatives are, we've played with some of them. I'm sure you have. I know we have together, but I played with some of them. It's done this way, and this is the way we're going to do it. And I don't want to hear anything about it. Let's see. We're into music now. Anthony, I know you have your musical page. Every good song has an ending. Every good life ends too. That is our nature. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. Simple truth. Promise this is late. We ran over.
Yeah, we're on a very. I mean, at least from my perspective, we're in a very, very difficult position here that we've been put in, and we're chasing things. We're like the mouse on the wheel, and we've got ego involved, and we have we're want machines. It never ends, and we're in bad shape. I mean, and you just have to be stoic at some point and say, going to live my life.
I think that's it. We try to get a little. Thank you for the compliment just a moment ago, but I think that's another thing, that if you and I do share something in common, and we share much, but it's not just the love of music and the ability to. I mean, when we were so simpatico playing it was scary, but the idea that I don't really consider myself a brilliant thinker in that sense, but I tried to read widely. I mean, I know my limitations. I'm not tuned enough in science, but like philosophy, theology, the social sciences, I guess. And I think, it kind of comes back, in a way it's attributed to Socrates, and it's kind of true. He said, well, one is, the only thing I know is that I don't know anything. The idea of questions, of questioning whether it's authority or your own self. I think that's very hard, to question your own self. That's part of why I think that some of the 12-step programs that we find with addictions, actually do work. I think it's why some therapies work, because it helps you do one of the hardest jobs, is to examine, who am I? Okay, you get that around, but why am I who I am? That's hard. And also sometimes, how did I get to be who I am? That's why I was asking about the group tonight. Is there some, I don't think we'd find it, but is there a shared moment across, not necessarily the same, but when it had the same impact?
Well, in the end, though, Dave, we're all confronted with an existential problem, and that is, first of all, in life we have to struggle to survive whatever we do, and we all have varying degrees of struggle, but we are all going to face, that brutal dead end, and the problem isn't death itself, because we've been there before, being that, obviously before we're born, we're not alive, so that's not a problem when you're not. But the problem is, you think of all this wasted energy, at the end, especially when things get bad toward the end. Now, some can go in their sleep, and some can go hard. That's a real problem. And in general, it's a problem. As you yourself, Dave, you and I both, I think, have improved as human beings as we've gotten older, and you keep going this upward direction, and it's almost an unthinkable position that it has to end. It's just, we're just out there in this uncaring universe, in this system called evolution, which is just absolutely brutal. It makes no sense whatsoever. The massive amounts of killings and pain that have gone on since that first cell was created. And if we really think about it, you could drive yourself nuts thinking about this killing machine called evolution. And it gets to the political thing where like now we're seeing it's just like death. These people are willing to kill us. They're willing to kill us.
And Brian, and by the way, the reason I'm frozen, I did learn something tonight. No, it's not you, it's me. I have my camera on top of my computer, and I hit it, and it fell down, and I don't feel like switching it over.
Well, it's got you in a good. It looks like you're trying to put on one of those phony Hitler mustaches.
Well, I have one.
I keep
I do have one, but it's not a kumbaya society here. Surrender, accept the things I cannot change. We could do millions of shows on that, especially those of us who are recovering addicts. How can I do when it's chocolate, a miracle too, the Candyman, depending on what the Candyman's offering. What I like about this too is, this is to our audience. not only do they really think, which I think is very cool, and I don't know that many of us do. I think, when I say many of us, I mean many people in the world. But I like most of them have a sort of a macabre sense that goes in mine of, what would it be? I don't even know. Gallows humor to a certain way.
Right.
That, and I think, that is not. I mean, yeah. What do you know? You're going to die. I don't know. I don't think you're born with that knowledge, but you're told it, and then you look around. Oh, yeah, okay, this is going to happen, and it's how you fill your space in that time. Some people,
have no choice about how you fill that space. That's the bigger problem.
Well,
and we've talked about that. We cannot say
I wasn't gonna,
life is good. It is
no,
good for individuals.
I'll give you an example. Last night, I don't even know. It could have been a con. But, so this is I promise, my last comment. But I've been thinking about this all day. So last night we went for a walk, Judy and I, which we do. Still. No, still. I said I docked my camera.
I know.
I have no camera.
It is kind of interesting.
But you can hear me.
I can hear you.
So what happens is this. Yeah, it's like I'm one of those correspondents that come in from somewhere. But we were taking a walk, and this woman, how sometimes out of the corner of your eye just sense not any weird, but it just, and she said, "Pardon me," and I said, "Yes." And she had a daughter with her, who was clearly not in very good shape, younger, and she said, "This is my daughter, Adrian, and she suffers from serious cancer, and we really don't have a whole lot of money." And I said, "I never carry cash." And I said, "Well, I'm part of that." She said, "Well, that's okay." And she said, "We have set up a GoFundMe." And, she actually was handwritten, obviously didn't have a lot of money, and she gave it to me. And I was thinking about it. And I thought, which I've thought all my life, okay, why that little girl? Okay. Why that little girl and why not? And there's no answer to that. There's no answer to that. You said it best, and I'm going to leave with that. It is Lenny Bruce.
It is.
Or Bob Swick. It is what it is, which is an extension of that. Not Swick is no Lenny Bruce, but you and I know.
Well, we
that idea.
We don't know what. In fact, many of us don't even appreciate that until the time comes where you say, "Oh shit, right. He was right." Like.
Yeah, no. I mean, it is. I mean, that's the reality, and what I find.
It was really never good, human. I mean, it really wasn't. It was
the good. That's just the good old days.
A few moments of the release of the bad.
I mean, there's wonderful things in the world, but they don't last necessarily. I mean, it's because we're just flawed, and we're individually flawed. Collectively, sometimes we're more flawed. But this idea, reality is what reality is.
Thanks, Veg. Yeah, this is free. Just give us a like. What you do is click something, and we'd appreciate that. If you share it, that we'd appreciate. But we don't want your money not because we're rich. We're not, but we're trying to do
Brian,
something.
I do owe it for you. I'm not sure. I'll let you know. I may not be able. I mentioned earlier the bridge over San Luis Rey. Yeah, Gary's a literate guy there. On December 4th, I think. Is a Saturday. I'm not sure. I don't have a calendar in front of me. And this person, I will reveal now, who's coming into the city, is the one and only Stormy Daniels. She's coming in for the Exotica, which is 4 X's. So it's not. It's beyond triple X convention, and she'll be there. And of course, as much as I love this show. I would have to go see if what I thought was real, but I don't know that. Anyway,
just a quick question: anybody in your family, like in the late 1950s, like show stag films in the basement? Influenced you as a 4-year-old. We talk about influences.
This is going to be weird. We love weirdness. Let's not into weirdness. You know what I like about pornography? And I mean, I don't watch it all the time, but what I like is. Yes, a lot of the women are exploited. Yes, there's sex, there's drugs and all that. Yes, it's a male-dominated world and all that. But some of those, and I believe Stormy Daniels is one, who actually takes charge of her life, and it is a place to see sometimes really feminine. I mean, she is the best I've ever seen at responding to trolls on Twitter. She's So yeah, of course it's a joke, and I just do it to shock you. People say, "Oh no, what, you went to Christian school?" But I mean, if I mean, well, actually, except for the real perverts that are almost always male, they're real people too. Really cheap, dirty, nasty strip club, because if you do, you'll see something you shouldn't. So of course I went and I saw my dad. You know what? I'm laughing. The first time I ever went inside a live strip show, I was 17 years old. It was in Cumberland County. It was at the county fair, and I'd wanted to go since I was 13, 12, just to see what was in there, the allure. And I went in, and I didn't see my dad in there, but I saw the mayor of Bridgeton. It was just weird, mayor, okay. And I can still tell you that show if you'd like to know it. I still remember the star of that show. Her name was Chili Pepper, and she was red hot. And all I can remember, she wouldn't go with PETA today. I remember she rolled around on a tiger skin rug. So if that set me down this road.
Well, I know one thing, Dave. You have done
a
lot for certain businesses. Dave, you graduated in high school in 69, correct?
69, yes.
Well, that
very good number.
The Trocadero in Philadelphia survived until 1969. Now, I don't know if it was any coincidence or not, but
no. Well, no. And I'm pleased to report.
I mean, I have visions of Dave being there in like one of these front tables, and then there's this drummer there, and there's these, the smoke is going through there, and you see the red lights on the amplifiers, and he's going like this. There's a sax player, and then there's Dave in the front row.
Well, you know how people.
He's like this.
How people. No. But you know how people used to say, I read Playboy for the interviews, and they're holding it up in the fold out. So this sounds like that. But you know what was true about that Coppertone Review, the strip show? They had some of the best music I've ever heard in my life. They were like, the James Brown's All-Star.
I think I found
come out
striptease music to be really cool, actually, for the most part.
No, and inside, I mean, because again, since people are talking about our music experiences, people know, you and I played together, but we also played in different bands. And this was a moment in my life, and I'm going to just walk away from this, but I have to say this. I was in college and I paid my way. No, of course you didn't pay your way through college. But I had two things going on. I was playing in a touring band. And when I say touring band, just Maryland, Delaware, Jersey, Pennsylvania, not that area. But so weekends and stuff. And so, I was going to classes around there. And a lot of times I have to cut my weekend classes. But this one time we were playing, and Brian, you go to Philadelphia. So next time I want you to tell me when you're up there, is it still there? It was at the corner of Broad and Tasker Streets, right? Near the Navy Yard, and I'm playing one night on a small stage. I was playing on the small stage, right? And I mean, it was small. And I still remember the song we were playing. It was Brown Sugar.
Like I say, Dave, you're just the background right now.
Nah, I know. I see you.
The show's just starting to get good. It's getting hot in here.
Yeah, there you go. And in '71, I looked out. You think it's hot now? Listen to the scene. I looked down to my left, and there was a hooker servicing a sailor underneath the table. I looked to my front. Two girls were slow dancing, right, to this song like this. But it wasn't slow dancing. And we had a new guitar player.
Dave.
No, he wasn't real worldly, and this was like his introduction. He'd only rehearse with us a little bit, and an exotic dancer was trying to impale herself on his guitar, and then in front was a giant guy. Like, I don't know if you remember K&T at all, but they had that giant singer, or Leslie West with Mountain, the Bob Height. I mean, just a big 300-pound man with this giant wooden phallus, like coming out of his pants, shaking at this girl. And I thought, this is so much cooler than physics class in college. I think I made.
We knew you were cool, Dave.
There we are. All right, Brian, with that.
All right. All right. Okay, folks. I'm going to take you out. I have a movie for everybody tonight. I hope I don't put on the wrong one. That can't happen, Dave, or we're all in trouble here. I don't want to get Dave's movies mixed up with my Super 8, you know what I mean? But his was 16 millimeter, I think, down the basement. I'm just kidding, Dave. Well, this is one of my earlier flicks, maybe about 10 years ago, maybe. And I guess a lot of the materials from the 1950s. So this is like, kind of like on this theme with Dave Price tonight. So this is called the Last Disco or something like that, or Last Tango in Paris. No, this is dedicated to Dave. Oh shit! If I can find it. Oh, it could be in big trouble here if it doesn't go right.
Let's go to walk on this sunset line. Let's go to walk on this cosmic laser. Let's go to walk on this precise line. Let's go to walk on this cosmic laser. I know you will come again on this new tonight. You will target mine again. Let's go to walk on this solstice line. Let's go to walk on this cosmic laser. I can see you walk on the sunlight around this wondrous solstice. Love will happen again.